Sorry? You're on live. You're on. No, you're on. You're on live.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. يا ربي صل على محمد وعلى سادتنا آله وصحبه الكرام. من تذكر جيران بذي سلم مزجت دمعا جرى من مقلة بدمي. أم هبت الريح من تلقاء كاظمة وأومض البرق في الظلماء من إضمي. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فما لعينيك إن قلت كفوفها متى وما لقلبك إن قلت استفيض يا همي. أيحسب الصف أن الحب منكتم ما بين منسجم منه ومضطرب. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. لولا الهوى لم ترق دمعا على طلل ولا أدقت لذكر الباني والعالم. فكيف تنكر حبا بعدما شاهدت به عليك عدول الدمع والسقم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. وأثبت الوجد خطي عبرة وظلام مثل البهار على خديك والعالم. نعم سار طيف من أهوى فأراقني والحب يعترض اللذات بالعالم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم يا لائمي في الهوى عذري معذرة مني إليك ولو أنصفت لم تلمي عادتك هادي لا سري بمستتر عن الوشاة ولا دائي بمنحصم ما حطني النصح لكن لست أسمعه إن المحب عن العداد في صممي إن اتهمت نصيح الشيب في عرضي والشيب أبعد في نصف عن التهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما للخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبنا أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم لو كنت أعلم أبي وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم فلا تروا بالمعاصي كسر شهوتها إن الطعام يقوي شهوة النائم والنفس كالطفل إن تهمله شاب على حب الرضاع وإن تخدمه ينفطم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم فاصرف هوى حاذر أن توليه إن الهوى ما تولى يصمي أو يصمي وراعيها وهي في الأعمال سليمة وإن هي استحلت المرعى فلا تصيبي مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم كم حسنت لذة للمرء قافلة من حيث لم يدري أن السم في التسامي واخشى التسائس من شباع فربما نصت من الطخام مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم والصفريق دمع من عين قادم تلأت من المحارم والزم حمية الندم وخالف النفس والشيطان وعصيهما وإنهما ما حضاك النصح فاتهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم ولا تطع منهما خصما ولا حكما فأنت تعرف كيد الخصم والحكم أستغفر الله من قول بلا عمل لقد نسبت به نسلا لذي حكم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم أمرتك الخير لكن ما تمرت به وما استقمت فما قولي لك استقيم ولا تزودت قبل الموت نافلة ولم أصلي سوى فرض ولم أصوم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم يا ربي صل على محمد وعلى سادتنا آله وصحبه الكرام. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله الله حي وباقي لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله الله الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله 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 لا إله إلا الله، هو الحبيب الذي ترجى شفاعته لكل هول من الأحوال مقتحم. الله 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 يا مولانا، لا إله إلا الله. يا ربي بالمصطفى بلغ مقاصدنا واغفر لنا ما مضى يا واسع الكرم. الله 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 يا مولاي صل وسلم دائما ابدا على حبيبنا خير الخلق كلهم. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله 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 لا إله إلا الله. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله 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 لا إله إلا الله. عليك صلى الله يا خير خلق الله، والآل والأصحاب والقوم أهل الله. عليك صلى الله يا خير خلق الله، والآل والأصحاب والقوم أهل الله. On you Allah pray, O best of all mankind, and on your offspring and the people of Allah. Alayka sallallahu ya khayra khalqillah, wal ali wal ashab wal qawmi ahlillah. The source of all treasure, wal ali wal ashab wal qawmi ahlillah. Your banners always high by Hassan and by Hussein. We pray to remove the pain by Hassan Rabbi, and ta'fu anni ad'uka Rabbi, and ta'fu anni رب العالمين. عالمين بالنبي السامي السامي رب العالمين. عالمين بالنبي السامي السامي أحسن ختامي واغفر وارحمني. أحسن ختامي واغفر وارحمني. يا روحي طيبي طيبي طه حبيبي حبيبي. يا روحي طيبي طيبي طه حبيبي حبيبي فهو طبيبي. ربي أكرمني فهو طبيبي. ربي أكرمني. رحمة الباري الباري تهدي أفكاري أفكاري. رحمة الباري الباري تهدي أفكاري أفكاري. تسمو أنواري أغدو متهني. تسمو أنواري أغدو متهني. أمسيت في العسل الذي ملكني الذي ملكني ملكني قادر ذليل. أمسيت في العسل الذي ملكني الذي ملكني ملكني قادر ذليل. له السماء بالواس ولا عتقني ولا عتقني عتقني كيف السبيل. يا رحمة للعاشق المولى عاشق معلى معلى ليل طويل. ومن عشق يصبر على تجلي على تجلي تجلي صبرا جميل أمسيت في العسر الذي ملكني ملكني قادر علي.
Finished. MashaAllah. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Shukran.
Finish, put the camera on.
I thought there were about 6 of you sitting there. Only 3. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فقد قال جل وعلا في كتابه المبين وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم وقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام من رآني في المنام سيراني يقظة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, we're going to complete 3 lines today, and I'm going to concentrate on the third one specifically as a topic, and we started last lesson on لولا الهوى لم ترق دمعا على طلل ولا عرقت لذكر الباني والعلم. The next line is وكيف تنكر حبا بعدما شهدت به عليك عدول الدمع وسقم وأثبت الوجد خطي أبرة وطنا مثل البهار على خديك والعنم. نعم صرى طيف من أهوى فأرقني والحب يعترض اللذات بالعلم. Those are the 3 lines we're going to cover today. This line specifically yeah, that's what it stopped at. This next line, فَكَيْفَ تُنْكِرُ حُبًّا, that line and the 5 lines after it are very, very special, because according to the dream in which the fakir, the dervish, whose name is Abu Siddiq al-Raja'i, I think, when he met Busayri in the marketplace asking him for the poem, and then he said, which poem, if you recall the story, and he said the one that you sang to the Prophet last night, and he described the story. That story is narrated through him, you see. There was a moment in the story where he said that when you read the poem, the Prophet was swaying كَأَغْصَانِ الشَّجَرِ, like the branches of a tree, from right to left. He began to sway right to left from this line, وَكَيْفَ تُنْكِرُ حُبًّا, and for the next 6 lines, in fact. Yeah. Imam Qurtubi said, هَذَا أَوَّلُ السِّتْ. This is the first of the 6 lines where the Prophet ﷺ moved from volumes. But funnily enough, at the end of one of these lines, he gives a commentary on one of the words, and he writes, oh, and by the way, I've commentated on this line, or this word, about Busayri and the second person, shakhsan akhar, in this conversation. I'm going to comment on a few of the words, and I'll give some tafsir as well. He says, فَكَيْفَ تُنْكِرُ حُبًّا بَعْدَمَا شَهِدَتْ. So how can you deny this love? The translation I'm reading from is Spiker's translation, which, by the way, you can buy now. It was out of print, but if you go online, if you don't have it, you can buy it on Who Books, HUBooks.co.uk, I think. It's available again. So he says, how can you deny this love when such honest witnesses as weeping and looking gaunt have testified to it against you? The word that he uses for testification is shahidat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Quran, Alastu bi rabbikum qalu bala shahidna. An incredibly pivotal verse in the Quran, an important verse. It's the pinnacle of the covenant, which when God created people, we discussed this right in this second lesson. He said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? Qalu bala. They said, yes, shahidna. We have witnessed it. And witnessing is something amazing. In Damascus, there's a masjid called Jami Hanabila. And there's a story about the masjid that when they built it, they couldn't ascertain the Qibla for some reason. And then one of the people there saw it in front of him. It was unveiled to him. And our religion has had a great, one of the great cornerstones of our religion is Shahada, is witnessing the unseen essentially. If you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, time and space becomes entirely relative to him. He puts his hand through something and grapes of Al-Jannah appear. Time and space is all relative when Allah wants to make it relative to us. And we have great belief in this and the miracles that we find in all of them, and we're going to talk about some of them today. So Shahada is the greatest level essentially of Ma'rifah, where you see. And what's incredible is in Al-Jannah, the greatest gift. Jannah is a material place. Incredibly, it's material, you see. This word is material, Jannah is also material, yeah, of a greater type of material, but it's still material, eh? It's just material. And people will probably take, contend that and say, oh, are you kind of downplaying Jannah? I'm not downplaying Jannah, I'm just saying it's just material. And this is very, very important. That Adam alayhi salam felt lonely in Jannah without suhbah. I was asked a question by one of the ahibah this week that, shouldn't we ask for Al-Jannah? People, you make dua. There's dua, sunnah du'as for Al-Jannah. But none of those du'as inferred to me, they don't mean literally Jannah in that regard, because Jannah is material. The Prophet ﷺ is more important than Al-Jannah. Jannah is material. You see, the Messenger of God is beyond that. So and not just that, Jannah, if you ask for Jannah, you're going to get it eventually, inshallah. But if you ask for the Messenger of God, then Jannah is going to come regardless, not as a lesser reward almost, because asking just for Jannah, you don't know what you're going to go through before you get there. But if you ask for the Messenger of God, then no harm will come to you. This is very, very important, because if you ask for to be in Zumra to Nabi alayhi salatu, the company of the Messenger of God on Day of Judgment, then there's nothing between you and Al-Jannah. If you ask for Al-Jannah, you don't know what you're going to get. Before that, you'll eventually get to Al-Jannah. Not to deny the Sunnah du'as, but we have to get our priorities right. Sayyidina Umar, when he kissed the black stone, he said, I only kissed you because the Messenger of God kissed you. To know the importance that you hold. This is incredibly important, you see. It's just a stone. It has a value because it was kissed by the Messenger of God, it received the value, the Sharaf only then. You see, and this is a very important point, you see. Because Al-Jannah, we're constantly, and this is where we get these problems with kind of this romanticizing of war. Romanticizing of war. If you look at the Sahaba's questions, we're going to look at later, they would constantly ask for the Messenger of God, will we be with you? And we're going to look at one of the dreams, one of the stories regarding that. So Shahada is the greatest level. Now what I want to mention about Al-Jannah was the fact that after people enter Al-Jannah, the vision of God comes later, and it eclipses everything else, metaphorically speaking. Everything else becomes unimportant. The great vision of God, Ru'yatullah Jalla wa'ala, which show, and that's Shahada, you see. That's witnessing. And the people of God witness in this world, and most definitely they witness in the hereafter. And that's why the material things, they distract us and cloud our minds from the reality of something. I was in London and I don't know what it shows, but the reality is that, and some people see in gold and white, and other people do see in blue and black. I'm talking about reality. That's what they see. Saqam is like an illness that manifests itself in terms of how, like, you become very yellow, very bloated. It's وَأَثْبَتَ الْوَجْدُ خَطِّ أَبْرَةٍ وَضَنًا مِثْلِ الْبَهَارِ عَلَى خَدِّكَ وَالْعَنَمِ. And the agony of love, wajd. Now this word wajd here, we have different, wajd. In kind of esoteric circles, the word wajd means loads of things. Normally it means somebody going crazy in the gathering. Wajd. Until somebody takes his iPhone, then he snaps straight out of it. So iPhone 4 maybe not, but wajd here is al-ahzan al-qalbiyya wal-halat al-ishqiyya. Wajd here means the sorrow of the heart, although we've translated it here as, or it's been translated as agony of love. Actually, this is very precise. Agony of love. Ahzan al-qalbiyya, where your heart, and an example of that is if you're asleep, one thing that you'll probably have experienced before is when you're asleep, the kind of what can I say, emotions, your sensory perception, or your emotions rather, are much stronger. So for instance, I mentioned last time, if somebody's in love, when they wake up, their heart's beating, they think that they've been hit by a train or something. Or if they feel sorrow, somebody dies in the dream, then they wake up actually feeling that that person's died. And the emotion, they're overcome by that emotion, but it's not true. And it's so effective that it stays probably for half of the day. The memory probably stays for much longer, stays much longer. This is al-ahzan al-qalbiyya, the most heightened level of heartfelt emotion. Like say the Aisha, when they accused of ifk, in the ifk, the story of ifk, when they accused her of zina, wal-'iyadhu billah, and before God exonerated her, she said that I cried so much that I thought I was going to die, or my chest was going to burst. So this level of, that's what al-Busayri is talking about, that he's at such a stage where he feels literally like his body's going to give way because of his separation from the beloved. And that's what wajd is. وَأَثْبَتَ الْوَجْدُ. Now the amazing thing is we have a romantic understanding of a lot of things. For example, just to kind of strike just to give an example, where people talk about Dajjal, everybody, all the youngsters come and Dajjal's going to come. The ulama, the Sahaba especially, they ask God to take them before Dajjal comes because of his fitna is so severe. People have made it into a computer game now, almost like, I can't wait. You don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Because he's gonna kill people and murder people. And more people are gonna leave their deen, they're gonna lose their religion. They lose their religion. Similarly, when people talk about the love of the Prophet ﷺ, often we conflate ideas. It's not an easy love, you see. It's a very difficult love. If you read the books of the Ushaq, it's a very, very difficult love. It's not easy. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Ya Rasulullah, I love you. Inni la uhibbuk. Inni la uhibbuk. And the Prophet ﷺ said, are you sure? Didn't say in those words of Qamaqat. He said, do you truly love me? He said, yes. He said, then anticipate poverty to come to you like a tide comes to the shore. You see, and poverty doesn't mean literally in material goods, but you're going to become impoverished. People will leave you. You'll become insane, essentially, in the sense of what people consider insanity to be. We're going to talk about that today on the third line, very importantly, and something that Kharbuti mentioned, which is incredible, about zuhud. So that's what this wajd actually is. So, I don't like, this is my opinion, of course, we tend to these days use certain traditional words almost to infer our own ostentation to people. You see, that arrogance is also when purposely you're using a word where the other person's going to think that you're associating that word to yourself. It's also arrogance. We use the word of we use words of the masters for the peasants, which we are. It's these words are very easily spoken, and the Prophet ﷺ said that one of the signs of the Day of Judgment, az-zuhdu riwayatan, zuhud, abstinence, comes just stories basically. Nobody does anything; it just becomes stories. You see, riwayah, that was the exact wording of the Messenger of God, as Barzanji mentions it, al-Isha'ah. Literally, just a riwayah. That's what it is. So khati abratin wadanan. Khati is 2 lines in classical English poetry. They use the word trenches, almost as if literally trenches have been dug on your face from crying. And people cried in that manner. Do you know the Khawarij, for instance? Khawarij were an early deviant group that were responsible for the killing of many Sahaba. When they caught their leader, if they would cry so much, these people, out of apparent fear of God, that literally they'd martyr and take your pick. But it shows you that people can cry to literally till your face is marked. But the Busayri's type of love is different. His love is directly for the Messenger of God, and literally when you see, it's a practice of one of the early generations. So these are like lines like لولاه لم تخرج الدنيا من العدم, that come in chapter 3. These lines, or ظلمت سنة من أحيا الظلام إلى, these lines are individual lines. This line, one of the secrets of this line is that if you read it constantly before you fall asleep, that many have written that they have seen the Messenger of God والسلام, as a consequence of reading this line. Bajuri mentions this in his Hashia. Funnily enough, I have an edition of that book with a modern marginalia footnote by some modern editor, and he writes at the bottom, you know, I tried it, it didn't work. You didn't do it properly. You can't blame Wazifa or Sayyidina Umar would read Fatiha and blow it on his head and he would be cured from headaches, migraines, whatever they may be. If we do it, it doesn't work all the time, because you have to look at who's reading what, you know. And I don't like to give this example as a comparison. I want to give the example because Anas was very young, just to show you different hands of different people. You see, where the story of the stones where they made dhikr in the hand of the Prophet Abu Bakr and Umar. One night, Anas ibn Malik was still a boy. He said they stopped moving when they walked off. I picked them up and they stopped moving. But he was a boy, and Anas ibn Malik became a great companion. But it just goes to show that you can't blame a tradition or something of that kind because of our ineptness to do something correctly and our state, our heart. So Busayri says, نعم صار طيف من أهوى فأرقني والحب يعترض اللذات بالعالم. It's line 8 in the Burda. And I'll break it down and then I'll give a commentary on the topic itself. A long time today. He states, نعم, most definitely, yes, Sara. Now the word Sara in the Arabic language, Sara Yasra, it means to come in the evening, nighttime. Sara, come in the nighttime. If you change the form to form 4 in Arabic, Asra, it means to take in the nighttime, which is in the Quran, Subhanalladhi Asra bi'abdihi. Glory be to he who took his servant by the night, Laylan, part of the night, from the Haram, sacred precinct, to the farthest mosque, so he could show him his signs. Now, the nighttime is very special, as Ghazali says. I mentioned this before probably. Ghazali says that the nighttime is the best time. He said for the fasiq and the wali or the mu'min. He said because the fasiq or the sinner or the asi, he does the worst stuff in the night because the night covers you. وَاللَّيْلَ كَافِرًا. The night is a kafir. He says they make a takfir of the night. No, the word kafir in Arabic, kufr, means to cover something up. So the night literally covers everything, so you can do whatever. And now it's even worse, you see. Before you had to go out in the night. Now in the night time you can stay in your room and do haram. You know. And Ghazali said for the pious man, for the man of God, the nighttime is the best because there's nobody to see his actions except God. So they're the most sincere. And he's awake when others are asleep. And God informs the angels of that my servant stays up when others are asleep for me. You know, stays up for me whilst others are asleep. So the nighttime is a very special time. Now here, the nighttime is related to the dreaming of the Prophet. He says, "Naam sara taif." The word taif in Arabic means khayal, a thought. But in Arabic, when the thought can be from the shaitan or it can be from other than shaitan. In Arabic, if it's from shaitan, it's called lamam in Arabic. Lamam. lamam. If it's from other than shaitan, it's called tayf. It's not often used anymore. People don't use tayf, they use khiyal or something like that. So tayf is from other than shaitan, and lamam is from shaitan. Yeah. Now he states the thought of man ahwa. Now we had this word earlier, hawa, in the line. لولا الهوى لم ترق, last lesson. So ahwa. Now we said that the word hawa can mean something bad as well. Hawa can also mean a desire that's not good. But hawa can mean desire that's excellent. And refer back to the lesson when we looked at the types of love. It was one of the types. But interestingly, Imam Maqlash states that the greatest in this context, this form of hawa is a pure form for what he loves of what he loves in the Prophet ﷺ. So he says the one sara tayfu man ahwa that I love. فَأَرَّقَنِي أَرَّقَ يُؤَرِّقُ تَعْرِيق means to wake, to awake, yeah, something or someone. So فَأَرَّقَني, and it woke me up. Then he says, وَالْحُبُّ يَعْتَرِدُ اللَّذَّاتِ بِالْأَلَمِ. It's translated as, oh, how love hinders the tasting of delight with its suffering. I'm not going to that's the translation, but Prophet ﷺ said dreams are 1/46 of prophecy. You see, the biggest problem is that we're complete dreamers. We have I get about millions of dreams. I don't interpret dreams. I mean, oh, I saw this. Very bad in the interpretation of it. So my point is, I can't recall. That's why I'm not mentioning what I can't remember. It was really bad though. That's rather I don't kind of speculate. Now my point is, dreams are very, very difficult to interpret, and the people of Basira can see that. They can see what that dream is. So you have to be very careful, because you may tell somebody a dream that has that science, that has that knowledge, that ilm, that ma'arifah, and you're telling all sorts of stuff about yourself to him, because that's what dreams do. You see, dreams talk about the state of people. Somebody went to Shaykh Ahmad Habbad, rahimahullah ta'ala, and told the Shaykh a dream, and he said, you need to stop missing your sunnah for fajr. Don't mess with these people, you know. But that's a good thing at least, and there's advice. So, but dreams are very, very important. I'm going to talk about that, inshallah. So now, this last line here, وَالْحُبُّ يَعْتَرِدُ اللَّذَّاتِ. Oh, how love hinders the tasting. Now the word يَعْتَرِدُ here, Kharputi said something amazing. He said يَعْتَرِدُ, it means يَقْتُلُ. It means to kill. To kill. So he says, if you take an arrow and strike it, if you aim an arrow at the enemy and you fire the arrow and you kill him, essentially you change his state from life to death. يَعْتَرِد. You see, i.e. what you threw as something from yourself ended in misery for him. So he says that's what it means here, that essentially love kills love. That is a very important point he makes. Love kills desire, kills it. You say, how can love kill desire? Isn't that the whole point? No, it's not. Al-Maqlash says that the highest level of ladha is ma'rifatullah. Ma'rifatullah. Yeah? Ma'rifatullah. But he says ladha here bil alam. What it means essentially is ya'tad ladhat bil alam. Kharputi says the following, that if you love the Prophet ﷺ, he will take you to a stage or to a level where you will begin to hate everything else. You just hate it because they can't exist in the same place. And the example he gives is of Bahlul. Have you heard of Bahlul? Bahlul was like an, you must have heard of him. I don't know if they use a different name in some country, but Bahlul was a faqir in the time of Harun Rashid. Bahlul Wali they call him. So Bahlul is his old man. You know, these people were like darawish, they were like fuqara. And people would laugh at them, make jokes of them. Their clothes would be ripped, no socks. They would probably have a musical instrument, even like a flute or something, or something of that kind. So Bahlul, always, you hear always Bahlul Harun Rashid, the story. Harun Rashid is a Khalifa. So Harun Rashid sitting there one day and he's thinking, I'm the Khalifa and I've gathered all this power and wealth. How do I put that? What about the Akhirah? How can I balance the dunya with the Akhirah? Now, by the way, I'm only telling this story, the Kharputi mentions it because I'll try to contextualize it. So Bahlul turns up, and in Harun Rashid's house is this really big, heavy object. So Bahlul's looking at it. Bahlul can see the question. He doesn't ask Bahlul. Bahlul has the mushahada, kashaf. He sees what's in his mind. So Bahlul sees this object and he's walking around it, and he takes one corner and lifts it up and it drops. Thinks, man, how am I going to lift this up? Harun Rashid is looking at it. He's like crazy. So he goes on the other side, tries to lift that up. It's not working. He can't. Then he goes into the middle and tries to grab it, and he can't. And he looks at Harun Rashid. He said, see, it doesn't work. He said, what do you mean? He said, dunya and akhirah. He said, you can't have both of them. You see, what he meant was that one side of the object was the dunya, and the other side was the akhirah. If you try to lift the dunya, you're not going to get the akhirah. And you see, if you go for the akhirah, you're not going to get any dunya. Having both of them, he said, is impossible. You see, he was a faqir, you see. And Harun Rashid kind of, because what we have now is, and I want to be kind of candid here in front, we should not try to justify our love for the dunya with kind of Sufi aphorisms. So what we do is we love the dunya or something, we love our iPhone or we love our car, and what we do is we'll say, to justify it, we'll say, you know what, Shaykh Abu Hassan said, rahimahullah ta'ala, that just say I'm a nafsi person and I'm working on it. And that's a very, very big problem. Called his famous book, al-Hamama. He talks about love, and he says, look, I don't really believe much in this kind of platonic love. And she's looked at this. He said, all right, let's go. We get you married. No problem, khalas. He said, shh, we can't do it. No way. He said, why can't we go and get the girl for you? Wherever the girl, tell me she lives. So he goes, no, Sheikh, I can't marry her. What? He said, she doesn't exist. What do you mean? He said, I had a dream. I fell in love and I can't. Which shows you how just a thought literally you can lose yourself over something. So, but my point is, at least it was a person in his dream, at least. Maybe they exist in Alam or Ru'ya. We fall in love with pieces of metal, literally, for 6 months anyway, until the upgrade comes out. But it's the lowest form of love in the history of man. And very unfortunate. So this is what Bahlul was talking about now. I've never seen anything more in terms of ghafla, negligence, but as for the living. Then he said, Allahumma farrighni lima khalaqtani. Oh Allah, free me just for that which you have created me to do. Then he said, oh Allah, do not keep away from me when I ask you. You see, when I ask you, do not keep it away from me. Yeah. Then he said, and do not punish me when I am asking forgiveness of you. Then he said, this man, he said, I got down, I went up to him and I said, give me this dua. Ayyuha Shaykh, allimni hadha dua. And he gave it to me. He said, as he's walking away, I said to him, man anta? And he said, ana Khadir. I am Khadir. The famous Khadir. Ila. is his name, according to some riwayat. But it's very telling, you see, his dua, those 3 points. Oh Allah, free me for that which you created me for. Oh Allah, do not keep away from me when I ask you, i.e. for ma'rifah, for, do not deprive me essentially. And oh Allah, the last one was, oh Allah, do not punish me as long as I ask repentance or forgiveness from you. It's an incredible dua. And this is the essential point that Ibn Ajib is making is of the dunya. When he talks about the dead and the living, both their states are no good essentially, unless they did something. Now, today we're going to talk about the main topic is the ru'ya, seeing the Prophet ﷺ. And it's an incredibly large topic. So my plan today was, I want to start with the conditions, which I haven't really discussed before in any of the previous lessons. And then we want to narrate somewhat 20 stories of people seeing the Prophet ﷺ. The good people here probably have their own experiences. And I want to talk about, inshallah, everybody loves stories, but stories about the Prophet ﷺ are the greatest, you see. And stories in dreams are very individual. So what I want to talk about first is seeing the Prophet ﷺ. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and we'll begin with this, inshallah. And he said to him, Aisha narrates, she says, جاء رجل للنبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Ya Rasulullah عليه الصلاة والسلام, Wallahi innaka la uhibbu ilay la habba ilayya min nafsi. You are more beloved to me than myself. And you are more beloved to me than my family, and you are more beloved to me than my children. The word walad, when it comes in the hadith, can mean daughters as well, as you know in the Quran, Surah Al-Kahf. Ittakhadha walada in Surah Al-Kahf refers to daughters that the mushrikeen claimed the angels were the daughters of God. Yeah, and indeed, when I am in my house, I remember you, meaning you're always on my mind, and I cannot have patience until I meet you. I cannot have Sahaba. These are the maqam of Sahaba. Yeah, so that I may see you. He said, and when I think about death, my passing, and your passing, he said, I know that you will enter Jannah, and you'll be raised with the prophets. But me, I may enter Jannah, but I fear that I will not see you. Look at his question, the question he is presenting to the Messenger of God. Yeah, the Prophet ﷺ didn't reply, except that Jibreel came and revealed the verse, وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَالصِّدِّيقِينَ وَالشُّهَدَاءِ وَالصَّالِحِينَ وَحَسُنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا. The verse was revealed because of his question, in which God said, those people who obey Allah and His Messenger, those are the people that God has granted them the bounty, from the أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ, who are granted from the prophets, and the Siddiqeen, and the Shuhada, and the Salihin. And what a most excellent company that is. Meaning you will be with those people, but you have to look at the depth of this man's question. You see, the only question he had at the end was, Inni إِذَا دَخَلْتُ الْجَنَّةَ خَشِيتُ أَلَا أَرَاكَ. I fear that I won't see you. The only question he has. And then God reveals a verse in his favor, which is incredible because he's Sahabi. Imagine, you don't see anything else, you see, except what I mentioned at the beginning, where people make dua for Jannah. He says, "Wa inni." He said, "Idha dakhaltu al-Jannah." Jannah is a side, but my point is, I fear that I won't be with you. So Jannah becomes secondary to him, whereas the company of the Messenger of God becomes primary to him. This is incredible. And why it's incredible was because it's the Messenger of God's essential looking at him that made him or gave him that status. He would have been Sahabi otherwise. They say about a Sahabi named Aswad al-Ra'i. Aswad al-Ra'i, when the Prophet ﷺ attacked Khaybar, when the war with Khaybar began with the Jews, the last stronghold of the Jews after they had treacherously broken and planned and plotted against the Prophet ﷺ, that when he reached the gates of Khaybar, there was a man, he was a black Abyssinian slave of one of the Jewish men, and when he heard all the commotion, he said, what's going on? Why are you all getting geared up? Who are you at war with? He said, the man who claims prophethood. So he runs out with the flock and he comes to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, are you the messenger who claims prophethood? He said, yes. He said, what will I get? If I become Muslim, what will I get? He said, you'll get Jannah. And he said, I'll become Muslim. And he said, and the Prophet ﷺ said, armor up, get your armor on. So he puts his armor on. He said, Ya Rasul, I'm an honest man. These sheep are not mine, they're somebody else's. What should I do? The Prophet ﷺ said, pick these pebbles up from here, throw them at the sheep, they'll run to their owner. And he throws them at the sheep, and they all run all the way back into the fort in the right direction, miracle. And they go back to their owner. He went, fought, and he died. He never prayed any salah, never fasted, nothing. He did nothing of ibadah. But because the messenger of God saw him and glanced upon this man, the man will be the messenger of God in Al-Jannah. This is incredible, you see. He had no ibadah, this man, zero, nothing. He just literally converted and died, which shows you, when people talk about connection to the messenger of God, that it wasn't him, you see, it was the fact that the messenger of God looked at him, made him a Sahabi just like that. And that was enough for him for the hellfire never to come near him, which is an incredible point. If you really look at it, that God has granted his prophet that on such an honor where a man doesn't do anything, nothing in his life, but just because you looked at him is sufficient, that is, for the man to enter Al-Jannah. This is a profound point. The question is, if somebody sees the Prophet, how do they know it's the Prophet? How do you know? Because this is a question in everybody's mind. You wake up and the people will say that, did I see the Prophet? Was it in my head? You see, this is why I believe that within the next 10 years, I think Talha, we discussed this last time. I think they will make a film with the Prophet with the person acting as the messenger of God. I think they will do it, and I think some Muslims will even be okay with it, because that's the way we're headed. You see, that's the way we're headed, because that's what appeals to us. And there will be Muslims saying, yeah, but it's got ta'aleem in it. People are learning from it. But, answer the following. Who will you be seeing in your dreams? You see, till this day, people are still thinking that Sayyidina Hamza looks like Anthony Quinn. Really, and to us, you don't know the real face. You see my point? And so how do you know? So there are three general conditions, and then I'm gonna explain these in depth. Three general kind of loose conditions that the scholars they put out. They say that a person sees the Prophet in his dream, and the Prophet says, "Ana Rasulullah." I have to tell you something. If a person sees the Messenger of God and the Messenger of God talks, it's a very high level dream. It's a high level of a dream. If it's him in his perfect form, and he talks to the person and addresses, because dreams are incrementally go up, seeing the Prophet as the ulama state. It's Ana Rasulullah, or he says Ana, whatever word or title he uses for himself, then he says he has seen the Prophet. The second almost way of ascertaining is that the person knows for certain, feels for certain that it was the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu. The feeling, I definitely saw the Prophet. The third is that in the dream somebody else says that's the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu. Somebody else in the dream informs. So these are the three general kind of, that's a general framework, but I'm going to get more specific now. There are two main opinions about, can you feel that the Prophet ﷺ came in your dream and it not be the Prophet ﷺ, and you're 100% sure? Can that happen? It's a question. Is an opinion, although it's not the strongest opinion, that some, and it was according to some, the opinion of Ibn Sirin, that if a person that claimed to see the Prophet ﷺ, Ibn Sirin would say, Sifhu li, describe him. And if he wasn't content, he said, you haven't seen him. Now, I'm going to make a ta'wil of that. I'm going to say that Ibn Sirin meant that you haven't seen him as he truly was. Because Ibn Sirin's is not the main position, you see. Qadi Ayyad, Imam al-Nawawi, and all of the majority of the ulama don't say that. They say that as long as you think you've seen the Prophet ﷺ, ghalaba dhannik, then you've seen the Prophet ﷺ. In reality, you have seen him. Because he said, مَنْ رَآنِي فَقَدْ رَأَى الْحَقِّ. He who has seen me has seen the truth. Meaning there's no way that, and in several other hadith, فَإِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَا يَتَمَثَّلُ بِي. Shaitan has no ability to take my form. The ulama, or Ibn Hajar for instance, states that this means that as long as you think, that's sufficient. As long as you feel, that is sufficient. Even if you don't see, but you feel, that's sufficient. Even if you hear but can't see, that's sufficient. Even if you see but can't hear, even if you can't see or hear but you can touch and feel, that's sufficient. Khalas, that's the message of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, in your dream. And Imam al-Nawawi says exactly the same thing. He says, سواء كان على صفة معروفة أو غيرها. He says the same. Qadi Ayyad, all the greatest ulama say, have the same opinion. So we begin now with some stories linked to people who saw the Prophet ﷺ. But Shaykh Yusuf bin Ismail al-Nabhani, you can get this book. It's in English. It's called On the Means of Beholding the Prophet ﷺ in a Dream. It's a small booklet published by Ihsanika, yeah, and it's a book he wrote of all the methods how to see the Prophet ﷺ. And he says himself in the beginning, he said, I wanted to see the Messenger of God badly. So he said, before I went to sleep, I read Surah Al-Ikhlas 3,000 times. He said, by God, I could not even describe the magnificence of the form that I saw in my dream to you, if I even wished to tell you. And then he goes on to give different things that people have tried. And I would argue that it's you can read whatever you want. It may not work. It's had something else. You know, a brother came to me, or somebody that I know quite well, and he's not in this room. So he came to me and he said, "Give me something to read to see the Prophet ﷺ." I want to give you to read. I said, I can give you something that somebody else has said. I have books on it. So he said, whatever. So I said, there's a real famous thing that you can read to see the Prophet ﷺ. So I said, go and read it. He came to me in the morning and he said, I saw the Prophet ﷺ in my dream. It's just heart centered. People have hearts like that sometimes, you know. Maybe for us, maybe not. But nothing wrong with the litany. It's the person. He really wanted to see the Prophet ﷺ, and that's very, very important, you see. And some of the ulama say that the greatest way to see the Prophet ﷺ is to read about him and know his sifat. Do you know what he looks like? We're going to talk about that, inshallah. You know, last week I saw this video on the internet. If you didn't see it, then I mentioned a few of the lessons about the gatekeeper of the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. I don't know if you mentioned it. For one beautiful thing that he said, I used to sit, he's still alive, I think. The video is a few years old, but maybe he's alive, inshallah. He said, I used to sit 1 meter away from the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. He used to keep the grave and look after it. Nobody else was allowed in, you see. And he said, I used to sit 1 meter away from the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Shaykh on the Shaykh Dito said, did you used to hear the Prophet ﷺ's voice? Great. He said, I used to sit there, and then after a while I could hear something nudging me, like out the way. And he said, I realized that angels had come into the room. Literally, I could feel them walking into the room. It's a place of celestial reality. That's a place where people don't understand. You see, we're just used to kind of these concrete brick. This is from heaven, and the entities that exist in that area, angelic forms of all the mightiest angels gather there every single day. People can literally feel it. You can feel them walking past you. It's incredibly heavenly. One sheikh told me that there was a moment some years ago where they saw literally a light from the dome of the Prophet's masjid that was going straight into the sky. I know people who witnessed it themselves, into the sky. This is the reality of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. And even when the people of God die, I still remember when Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin passed away, it rained in Medina on the same day. People of God, when they're taken, people of the Messenger of God, we're going to find out what happens. There's a story, and these are so many different stories. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anh woke up and he was fasting. He was fasting, and he freed that day 20 slaves, freed them. And he tied his sarawil, his longi, he tied it fashadda alayhi, and he stood up and in very simple clothes, and then he said to the people, he says, رأيت النبي عليه الصلاة البارحة وأبا بكر وعمر فقالوا لي يا عثمان أفطر عندنا غدا. This is the last moment of his life. He said, I saw the Messenger of God yesterday, and Abu Bakr and Umar, and they said to me, break fast with us tomorrow. عندنا غدا. ثم دعا بمصحف فنشره بين يديه وقتل من يومه. And that was the day that he opened the Mus'haf and they killed him that day. This is the highest level of connection to the Prophet ﷺ, highest level of contact with the Messenger of God. Literally, where the Messenger of God comes to you and says, get ready tomorrow, you break fast with us. Because he was fasting, you see. Can yuftir. Incredible, and emotional because he was murdered, you see. The dreams that followed were incredible. I would document, I was going to talk about them, but there were too many. The amount of Sahaba, where they saw the Prophet ﷺ weeping and they said, they've killed Uthman. Yeah, they've killed Uthman. But it just shows you that when any incident was to take place, like when Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, somebody comes to him and says to him, I saw the Messenger of God in my dream. He said, so in my dream, and he said, what did he say? He said, Ya Abdullah, by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, you have, where have you gone after us? Alumma, he said, come to us now. What have you have left us. And he said, that's what you saw. He said, yeah. He said, then I'm going to die. It's almost as if, and this is incredible because the Messenger of God is calling them and informing them that tomorrow that final destination has been, you've reached it. And what's incredible about this is, who would have want that? Just people are scared of death. Imagine the Messenger of God comes to you and says, the Sahaba comes to you and says, after bina, ghadan, you'll break your fast with us tomorrow. The fears just disappear, you see. Disappear completely. Now, other dreams. One of the most documented series of dreams about the Prophet ﷺ appearing in a very distressed and very emotional state was the murder of his grandson, Imam Hussain, alayhi salam. It was, and people have to remember, and this is why people have lost almost to a degree in this day and age. I'm not going to talk about anything negative in that form, but when you talk about people, you have to take emotion into account. When you take the emotion of the Prophet ﷺ into account, you have to be very, very careful. Very, very careful. If you talk about his mother, for instance, you have to be very, very careful. If you talk about his daughter, which nobody should talk about Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayhi salam unless you got some correct information. Otherwise, keep your mouth closed, because that's somebody that you do not want to make a mistake regarding. Never. Because when the Prophet ﷺ calls a person a part of him, you know, that same person who looked after the Rawda, he said her bed was in the room behind the Prophet. Her bed, he said, the Ottomans took it. Well, good. He said they didn't leave anything for the Saudis. He said they took her bed. It was in the room next door to the room of the Prophet ﷺ. You see, I remember somebody who narrated a story of a sheikh who's alive now. I'm not mentioning his name because maybe I wasn't supposed to narrate it with his name. I don't think anybody will know him here. He's an unknown person, but he's a great man of God. He was walking in Bakir, and this person said that he stopped. I think this person, he was with him actually, or maybe not. And he said he stopped and he began to weep, and then he carried on walking. And the person with him said, what happened? He said, I said, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And he said, why did you weep then? He began to profusely weep. Yeah. And he said, I heard a voice say, the voice of Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam said, she said, قَدْ نَسِيتَنَا. She said, why have you forgotten us? Which is al-Muhammad essentially. So you have to be very, very careful in talking about or discussing people that are deeply connected to the Prophet ﷺ. You see, a lot of big people have fallen because of this. So when you talk about Imam Hassan or Hussein, do you know that the Prophet ﷺ had a dream? And in his dream, he saw his daughter. And his daughter took a part of her body and placed it in front of the Messenger of God. And she, in his dream. And then when he woke up, he said, this will be the birth of Hussein. This is the seriousness of the matter, you see, of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, we dream about the Prophet ﷺ, imagine it. And the Prophet ﷺ's dream about Fatima Zahra, which is, you have to understand that. How, you know, one thing is for us to dream, but if the Messenger of God is dreaming and he's seeing his daughter in his dream, that's the Messenger of God now we're talking about. It's a very, very high status. Somebody once asked me a ridiculous question. He said, was Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayhi salam better than all the Sahaba? I said, you don't even have a right to ask that question. I said, none of the ulama debate that issue. They don't talk about her. When they talk about Afdaliyah, they just leave her to one side, you see. She has her own category, she has her own association to the Messenger of God. You don't get into that issue, you see. You just don't go there. So he had a dream. Abdullah ibn Abbas narrates. His take on the Abdullah ibn Abbas, Marratan min nawmihi, and this is catalogued because there's a lot of dreams like this that people had exactly at the same time. And he said, Qutila Hussein, Qutila Hussein. He was shouting like he just woke up, and he kept saying it. Nobody had known if Sayyidina Hussein alayhi salam had been killed. And this is before he had been killed. وَكَانَ ذَلِكَ قَبْلَ قَتْلِهِ. So the people said, what are you talking about? If you know what you're talking about? Before he had been killed. He said, I saw the Messenger of God in my dream. وَمَعْهُ الزَّجَّاجَ مِنْ دَمٍ. He was going around and he had a glass vessel and he was collecting blood. And he said, now this is incredible because recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, you know, I have no interest in cursing Yazid, but I have no interest in him at all. I leave that to Imam Ahmad and his takfir of him. But he shouldn't be part of any mention in any gathering. I mean, I'm not talking negative, forget positively. I'm saying just to ruin the gathering. Because why? Because he was responsible for killing the Messenger of God's son, grandson. But look what the Messenger of God said to him, to Abdullah ibn Abbas, his own cousin. He said, do you know what my people did after me? Yeah. He said, أَلَا تَعْلَمْ مَا صَنَعَتْ أُمَّتِي بَعْدِي. He said, do you know what they've done? Now, this is the Messenger of God in an incredibly distressed state. He said, قَتَلُوا إِبْنِي الْحُسَيْنَ. He said, use the word my son. He said, they've killed my son Hussein. وَهَذَا دَمُهُ وَدَمُ أَصْحَابِهِ. This is his blood and the blood of his companions. أَرْفَعُهَا إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. Meaning I won't let it stay on this earth I'm collecting it to take back to the heavens. Now, you read the books of Tariq, the ulama say after the blood of Hussein was spilt on the land of Karbala, they said Iraq will never have peace again. A man came to Anas ibn Malik or Abdullah ibn Abbas from Kufa in Hajj. He said to him, if we step on an ant, does it invalidate our ihram? He said, who do you think you are? He said, what do you mean? Give me an answer. He said, you kill the grandson of the Messenger of God and you ask me about stepping on ants. Who do you think you are? You desert him in that manner. And there were several dreams. In one dream, the Prophet ﷺ is seen with dust in his hair, doing the same thing, collecting the blood of his ransom. And then they wonder why Baghdad keeps getting sacked. If it's not the Mongols, it's ISIS. That land will never have peace. That where the blood was spilt of the family, the progeny of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. But this was a dream that Abdullah ibn Abbas had on that day. And then he said, in another dream of Salama, she narrates that, and she was weeping. And they said, why are you crying? She said, رَأَيْتُ النَّبِيَّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ تَعْنِي فِي الْمَنَامِ وَعَلَى رَأْسِهِ وَلِحْيَتِهِ تُرَابٌ. On his beard and on his hair was dust. And I said, مَا لَكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. He said, شَهِدْتُ قَتْلَ حُسَيْنَ آنِفًا. He said, I witnessed the killing of my grandson from above. Anifan, which is again, these are dreams of Salihin. These people are seeing the emotional state of the Prophet ﷺ with his ummah. You see, it shows you these are the A'imma of the ummah, because the leaders, they see the Messenger of God telling them how he feels about everybody else, not about them, but everybody else. We're going to talk about some more Bushra dreams now, inshallah. There was a dream narrated by Hamza al-Attar. He said, I was with Hassan al-Basri and a man came. He said, Ya Aba Sa'id. He said, I saw the Messenger of God yesterday in my dream. He said, and he said, what happened? What happened? He said that, no, this I'm not going to. Abshir from Abshir. This is not the one I want to read. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, this, sorry, it's underneath. Narrated by Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, sorry, this dream. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was a great Khalifa of Islam. He narrates that I saw the Prophet in my dream, and Abu Bakr and Umar, both of them sitting next to him. I gave him salam, I sat there. He said, whilst I was sitting, I saw Ali and Radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Muawiyah, Sayyidina Ali Radiallahu anhu, and Amir Muawiyah Radiallahu anhu, both of them. And imagine they had war in Jabal, Sahaba. And so, فَأَدْخَلَ بَيْتًا, they entered the house. Okay? One by one. So one of them goes in, Sayyidina Ali, and comes out, and he said, it has been declared in my favor that I was right. He was right. He was that I was right. By who? By Rabbul Kaaba, by Allah Himself. Yeah. Immediately after Muawiyah goes in, comes out, al-Atharihi, behind him. He says, God has forgiven me. Meaning both of them were at the end of the day forgiven by, Muawiyah, even though he went against Ali, he was forgiven for what happened. But the point was that they were still both with the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, at the end of the affair. Now, in another dream, one of the ulama had a dream. He said, رَأَيْتُ النَّبِيَّ قَائِدًا فِي الْمَسْجِدِ. He was sitting in the masjid, the Prophet ﷺ. And in front of him was none other than Malik ibn Anas. You know, one of the greatest dreams is when somebody else has a dream of a person who's with the Prophet ﷺ, and he's told to go and tell them. I remember a blind person who hasn't seen this person before, had a dream with the Prophet ﷺ and this person, and didn't know who it was, and described the person that he saw in his dream. And that's how we found out who it was, and he went to tell them. A blind person. I mean, if you need any more. And he said the Messenger of God in front of him had musk. And he would take the musk and put it in the lap in front of Imam Malik And he would take it and put it in front of Malik. And Imam Malik would take it and give it to the people. It's one of the signs of what Imam Malik was going to become. In a dream, the uncle of Imam Malik, of Imam Shafi'i, had a dream. And he saw the Prophet ﷺ. He said, Ya Rasulullah, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, he was his cousin, Ibn Amrik, he's my cousin. Yeah, so Shafi'i, he's my cousin. Muhammad ibn Idris is my cousin. He said, have you given him anything? Have you given him something, or have you chosen him for something? Given him something special, chosen him? And the Prophet ﷺ said, Na'am. I ask God that. He's never questioned by God. He has no questioning. He said, Ya Rasulullah, what did he deserve? What did he do? And he said, he sent a salah on me, a prayer on me. He said, nobody has ever sent a prayer like that on me. He said, Ya Rasulullah, what was it? Ma tilka salah, Ya Rasulullah. He said, Kana yusalli alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin kullama dhakru dhakirun, wa salli ala Muhammadin kullama ghafala an dhikri ghafilun. And in another dream, Imam Uqlishi mentions that one of the ulama saw Imam Shafi'i walking with confetti roses being thrown on him, and a green kiswa being draped over his back by the people of heaven just for that one salawat. Imagine the weight of what these people wrote. If it wasn't, I think he wrote it in the Kitab actually, in the introduction. He wrote that salawat just for that one. And people now, and this is my point, and people now have no problem with putting SAW there. What are you talking about? You have time to write your text message. Why can't you just at least put the full salawat there? Peace be upon you. You have time for everything else. This is the reward that the people get for it. Why would you want to keep yourself away from that reward? Shibli, if you know who Shibli is very important. Shibli, everybody thought was mad, you see. Shibli is this great Sufi dervish. You don't have them anymore. Not the dervishes anyway. Yeah. So anyway, the real term fuqara, Antum al-fuqara ila Allah, wallahu ghaniyul hamid. Now the word faqir. Now the word faqir is again, it's just the real fuqara, real people they gave everything up. The fuqara of Morocco, for instance, were slightly different to all of them. The reason they were different was because their zuhud was literally giving everything up. They just wake up in the morning, make dhikr till the night, and then wake up in the morning, make dhikr for about 70 years until they die. That's all they do. It's like their job. It's all they do. And often they would beg for money just to eat, and then would carry on doing what they do. And by that, many people didn't. By that, the mercy of God descended on people, and people were saved from diseases and calamities by those elect group of people. And people say, oh, how can you say that? How can you say that these pious people, because of them God has mercy? Having you had the hadith in Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, his wife narrates Zainab bin Jahash, so I woke up and I saw the Messenger of God wake up in sweat, and he was sweating profusely and with a worried look on his face, an extreme worried look. She said, Ya Rasulullah, what's happened? He said, they have penetrated it. She said, what do you mean? He said, Ya'juj and Ma'juj have made the hole. It's in Bukhari. And what did she say? She said, Ya Rasulullah, can they come when there are good people amongst us? What's that telling you? Good people save people from these calamities. He said, only if evil is much, meaning they'll be predominated. They'll be predominated. You see, they'll just be taken away, Allah will, and there will be what we have now. So Shibli, one of the great ulama, Abu Bakr, Muhammad ibn Umar, he said, I was with Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, and Shibli comes in. Imagine Shibli, you gotta imagine him. Shibli is this dervish, ripped clothes, probably, you look at him and you think, oh, he's Shibli again. He's gonna say something odd. Ha 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 ha. Because the ulama, that's what they had to give rulings by Sharia. And these dervishes used to come and say things, and they'll say, oh, these people are majnoon. So he comes in and they say, Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, one of the great ulama of the early generation, stood up, hugged him and kissed him on his head. He says, the narrator Abu Bakr Muhammad bin Umar says, Ya Sayyidi, he said, Stafal hadha bishibli wa anta wa jami'u min Baghdad yatasawwar annahu majnoon. He said, you're kissing his head, and everybody, you and everybody, knows that he's a madman, he's crazy. He said, I only did that which the Messenger of God did. Said, what are you talking about? He said, last night I had a dream, and I saw the Messenger of God kissing Shibli on his head. And I said to the Messenger of God, Ya Rasulullah, ataf'al, exactly what you asked, ataf'al hadha bi Shibli. Ya Rasulullah, are you kissing Shibli's head? What's Shibli done? And the Prophet ﷺ said, هذا يقرأ بعد صلاته. This he reads after his prayer. لقد جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم إلى آخر السورة, to the end of the surah. And after that he reads 3 times, صلى الله عليك يا محمد. You see, and because of that, he has rank, you see. The next story is one of probably my favorite here. You have the story of Imam As-Sawi. Imam As-Sawi is a great theologian. He says, I woke up and I went to sleep, and lo and behold, I'm in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, masjid of the Messenger of God. And he said, I looked and I saw a crowd of people, and the message and a man sitting in the middle. The crowd of people, everybody had a book in their hand. Every person had a book. So I walked up and I looked and I asked one of them, what's going on here? He said, that's the Messenger of God. I looked. He said, who are these? He said, hum ashab al-madahib. These are the ulama. So I looked, and the first person to go in was Imam Shafi'i. He had his book. He said, Ya Rasulullah, can I read my book to you and tell me what mistake I made and where I should correct it, and if my belief is correct and if my law is correct. So he reads it, and the Messenger of God listens to him, and he said, okay. And he sits next to the Messenger of God. He said, then I saw Imam Malik go in, does the same, sits next to. Then Abu Hanifa goes in. He said, like this, all of the great Ai-Imma, I saw them. So he said, I kind of pushed my way forward as well. And I had a book in my hand as well. All of a sudden. So I went in front of the Messenger of God. And I said, Ya Rasulullah, I have a book as well. He said, what's your book having? He said, this is my belief and the belief of Ahl Sunnah. He said, whose book is it? He said, it's not my book. He said, who wrote the book? He said, Abu Hamid wrote the book. Ghazali. He said, where's Ghazali? He said, lo and behold, Ghazali appears next to him. He said, Ghazali kneels in front of the Messenger of God, kisses his hand, takes the hand of the Messenger of God and puts it on his cheeks like that. Tabarruka for barakah. He said, okay, now you read the book. So he said, I began to read the book. And when I got to the point where he praises the Messenger of God and his sifat, he said, Yabtasim, he began to smile. And he never smiled for anybody like that, more than this book of Ghazali. And then he looked at me and he said, that's okay and it's correct. And he said, I woke up. Ashab al-Madahib. The next story is about another Imam. Abdul Qadir Ash-Shadhili, in his commentary, his biography of Imam Suyuti, states the following. He says that Imam Suyuti saw and I'm going to talk a bit about Suyuti now. He said, I saw the Prophet ﷺ in my dream. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Shaykh al-Hadith. If you want to know who Shaykh al-Hadith is, well, if Messenger of God calls you Shaykh al-Hadith, I mean, you're pretty Shaykh al-Hadith to everybody is. You see. I said, Ya Rasulullah, he said, Ya Rasulullah, he said, I'm in Ahl al-Jannah, ana. He said, Ya Rasulullah, am I from people of Jannah? The Prophet ﷺ said, yes. He said, min ghayri adhab sabaq. He said, without any punishment whatsoever. He said, for you, yes. Why is he saying that to Suyuti? There's a story, I'll tell you several stories. I got loads of Suyuti stories. Suyuti saw the Messenger of God more than 70 times. Some say in a wakeful state. I'll tell you a story first before the wakeful state one. He wrote 6 books in defense of the parents of the Prophet being in heaven. in Al-Jannah. After which the Prophet ﷺ came to him. He said, what do you want as a reward for it? And this is a sunnah. You find that when people write in praise of the Messenger of God, they get rewarded in their dreams. I still remember I attended his janazah and I went to visit him 1 week before he died. Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin, after he wrote his book, Muhammad Rasulullah alayhi salatu, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I saw him in my dream. He had 4 plaques like in Fatu Makkah, and he was in armor with other Sahaba, and he indicated, and they were hanging something on the Kaaba. He said, when I looked, it was my book that I'd written. And the Prophet ﷺ said, what do you want? What do you want in as a gift for what you wrote? And they say about him, I know this because I still remember, I was 18 years old when this happened in Syria. I still remember they say that he died because he had a problem with his stomach. They wouldn't let doctors operate on him because the Messenger of God never gave him permission to leave his house. And the day the permission was given, he died after that. I mean, he was incredible. Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin. Now his name is quite famous, very famous in the world. Suyuti, after that, so in one story, the great scholar Imam Qustalani wrote a book called Mawahib al-Dunya, and there was a rumor going around in Cairo that he had plagiarized Suyuti. He felt incredibly bad about it because Suyuti was Shaykh al-Islam. You see, he was so big, Suyuti, that he was telling people that there's nobody on planet Earth that's more knowledgeable than me. And people started saying, what's this man doing? And in the night time, the Messenger of God came in his dream. He said, stop it. Don't say that to the people. You lose your respect. Don't say that. He said, also, whatever you say. He said, I've never met a man more. It was absolutely true. You know, after the age of 40, he never opened his mouth, never spoke to anybody, he just wrote. So Qastalani takes his hat off, his shoes off, and he walks to Suyuti's house in humility, begging for forgiveness. I didn't do it. That's my own book. He knocks on the door with no reply. Knocks again, no reply. Knocks again, and just stands there. After a while, Jalaluddin, Imam Suyuti, opens the door. Says, don't worry about it, go. Close the door again. They asked him later what happened. He said that I heard the door knock. He said I couldn't open it. He said, why? He said I was sitting next to the Messenger of God. He said I looked at the Prophet ﷺ and I wasn't going to open the door. He said after he knocked 3 times, the Prophet ﷺ said, open the door. Tell him it's okay. And that's what he did. This is Suyuti. This is the man who is visited by the Messenger of God ﷺ. He has a book on the Mawlid as well, defending the Mawlid. You got to be in the right camp here. Who's seeing the Prophet ﷺ and who's not? I mean, Suyuti is, there's loads of dreams of Suyuti like this. Similarly, there's one of Umar, Sa'uddin Taftazani. I tell you his story as well. Sa'uddin Taftazani was a little boy, 10 years old. And he was in a class and everybody made fun of him. They said he was like, he didn't have intelligence. He was, believed he was ahead. So they said, oh, you know, there's always one in the class, or 2 or 3. These days, there's 10 of them in the class. The exception is the mashallah one. So, but he was actually good, but he wasn't as intelligent as everybody else. And they would make fun of him. They would say, you're not doing, you don't understand anything. And the teacher would also try to comfort him, but and he was 10 years old. Imagine it. That was a 10-year-old. Look at the strict criteria for being a scholar. So he used to go to the masjid after and used to revise all day, all night, day and night, wouldn't sleep, trying to get it right in the class, get the class, and it's not working. He's sitting in the masjid and a man comes to him. He says, come with me. He says, who are you? He said, I'm not asking questions, come with me. He said, I ain't going anywhere. He said, do you know what class I'm in? Do you know what happens in my class? Do you know even with all this work, what's going to happen in my class? I'm not going, I'm going to time for you. Carries on, the man goes away. Man comes to him again. He says, you're coming with me. He said, I've told you already. I can't give you 3, 4, 1, 2 minutes. I don't know who you are. And the third time he came, he said, you either get up or it's going to be big trouble. I'm telling you now. So he got a bit worried as a kid. So he gets up. He said, he took me to the outskirts of the city. And very easy, outskirts, cities are very small, or towns. Outskirts are very quickly, like down the road. And he said it was all green area outside. And he said he walked with me, and then he stopped at a point, and I looked across, and there were a group of people sitting under a tree looking at us. He said, come with me. He said, I walked over, and there was a man in the middle, and he said to me, he said, Umar, what's the problem? So I looked at his face. It was a messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, and all of his companions around him. He said, Ya Rasul, I don't understand anything. Teacher speaks. I don't know what he's talking about. This concept, that concept, mantiq, balagha, mantiq, same thing. He said, come here, kneel down. Udnu. He said, he took his saliva out of his mouth and put it 3 times in my mouth. He said, go back now. Those people who are in knowledge circles know who Sa'aduddin Taftazani is. He has the most complex books. After that, he wrote a commentary on a book on mantiq in one night. Some stories suggest, I don't know if they're true or not, that when he went back, the teacher looks at him and he says, oh, Umar, there's something different today. And he became the Shaykh al-Islam of that madrasa after all those students became his students. Now my question is this: when we're stuck studying, we're all students here. Do we get that? Do we get somebody coming to us saying, you're coming with me? Where am I going? Just come with me. And you turn up and the messenger of God is sitting there. These are the students of knowledge. You see, you know the fish, they're all dying in the sea. You know the fish die, the ulama die. Because the fish make a dua for students of knowledge. Somebody said to me, there's loads of students of knowledge now. No. If there were, there'd be loads of fish as well. Because fish make a dua for people of knowledge. When the fish die, the ulama die. It's just as simple as that. And you can pretty much see it's come exactly at the same time. The sea has depreciated, and so have the ulama. Now, we move to another story. And this is a really beautiful story. And this is about visiting Medina al-Munawwara. I remember a story when I was in Damascus. There was a guy who went to Medina Munawwara, and this was on. There's somebody trustworthy told me this, and he went on Umrah, a student of knowledge. When he got there, he was in Medina Munawwara, and you know the food they serve in the masjid, yogurt, and they give you. So he was eating it, and he made a comment about the food, a negative comment about the food. And in the evening, in the night time, he said the Prophet ﷺ came in his dream and told him to leave the city. Imagine that. He went back to Damascus and he went to the ulama, and the ulama said to him, look, they said something, and eventually one of the great awliya came in his dream and said he could return. You see, I know loads of stories like that. I know people who have traveled in our group, I've seen them, who you get to Mecca and they say, what do we need to go to Medina Munawwara for? What do we need to go for? One of those guys, I remember, when some of the brothers went, and he said that, and what happened was somebody stole his car and burnt it, and he had to come back to England for the dunya. He never got to go to Medina Munawwara. Well, Medina doesn't want you. Only the people of love can go to Medina Munawwara, you see, and those who are there are blind to everything there anyway. The ones that are averse to that. So this Jundi narrates that Abu Bakr al-Saksaki made Hajj 1 year. Listen to this. But he couldn't for some, and bear in mind in those days it's difficult sometimes to travel. You know, it's not like now. He couldn't travel to Medina Munawwara. He couldn't travel. He came back and he said, I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't sleep. I went all the way and I couldn't go to Medina. He couldn't sleep at night. Yeah? قَلَقَ لِذَلِكَ قَلْقًا شَدِيدًا. He just could not sleep. قَلْقًا means not to be able to sleep. In the night he saw the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Ya Aba Bakr. He said, لِمَا لَمْ تَزُرْنَا. He said, why didn't you visit us? كَمَا زُرْنَاكَ, like we visit you. Imagine, look at the statement of the Messenger of God. He said, بِكَرَمِكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ فَعَلْتَ ذَلِكَ لِي. He said, only by your unlimited, in the human sense, unlimited mercy did you forgive me for this. That's what he means. بِكَرَمِكَ, meaning فَعَلْتَ, that you came in my dream. Still, even though I didn't visit you. He said, فَدْعُوا لِي فَدَعَ لَهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. He said, make dua for me. and the Messenger of Allah made dua for him. Who wouldn't want that? You make a mistake and the Prophet comes in your dream. I don't know if I've got no stories left. Another narration, and this is about forgiveness. One of the ulama, one of the people saw the Prophet in his dream and said, Ya Rasulullah, make forgiveness for me. And this is really important concept here. Why do we want the Messenger of God to make forgiveness for us? Because there are only certain ways that things are done in this world and in the celestial realms. وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. And when they wronged themselves only, and they came to you and asked forgiveness of God, and you asked forgiveness on their behalf, only then would they find God oft forgiving, oft merciful. I once was talking to somebody, the audacity of people. I mentioned the verse to him. He said, but how can you prove the Prophet's forgiveness accepted? Who do you think you are? Really? Are you serious? I go, if the Messenger of God is not, who's going to be accepting it? I go, people have that, and then they wonder why the Prophet is saying, look what they did after me. Suhkan, get them away from me. These people, get them away from me. And the angels literally throw them away, lift them and they throw them. So he says, Ya Rasulullah, make forgiveness for me. Ask for forgiveness on my behalf. Yeah. And listen to what he says to the Prophet. He said, the reason I'm asking you is because Sufyan ibn Uyayna narrates from Abu Zuhr and Jabir that apparently you never said no. He goes with Dalila. He said that apparently you never said no. He's like saying, Ya Rasulullah, I've heard that you don't. And the Prophet smiled, you see. And he said, God's forgiven you. Why is that really important? Do you remember all of the narrations of when the Prophet, like the Ansari man, for instance, when a man comes to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, give me some money. And the Prophet puts his head down. Not like this, but puts his head down. And he keeps asking. And Sayyidina Umar says, can you stop, please? Ya Rasulullah, God hasn't burdened you with the request of this man. He wouldn't stop, he was incessant. The Prophet didn't like the comment. And Sayyidina Umar was asking for the right of the Prophet in his right. He did. And then a man stood up and said, Ya Rasulullah, give him, for God will not leave you short-handed. And the Prophet smiled. And then he called for some money and he gave it to him. He borrowed money to give to him, which is incredible. Now, this is another one. People say, oh, you Pakistanis, illa talha yani, talha Pakistani as well. They say, oh, you're obsessed with putting the Quran at the top. You don't even read it. The usual. People have no adab for the Mus'haf, you see. They put it under, Harry Potter. They don't care where they put it. Us, we have ihtiram. Yeah, we don't read it that much. We try our best. But it goes at the top in the ghilaf. We know where it goes. And they say, rather you read it and put it wherever. Well, let's see. Two men, Salihin, saw the Prophet in their dreams. Yeah? One of them was cut off halfway. Yeah? And he said to his companion, he said, if you see the Messenger of God and I don't get to give him salam, give it on my behalf. So he did. He said, Ya Rasulullah, why did you not see my companion, my friend? The Prophet looked at him, and why was his vision cut off? He said, لأنه ربما وضع مصحفه ثم وضع الكتب فوقه. He said, maybe he left the mushaf there and put the Quran and put books on top of it. Take it at your own risk. That's salihin. This is shahada ru'ya. You see, now, this is an incredible point because it shows you the kind of appreciation for adab in all things. some of the Salaf, they'd give up their beds to put their masahib and they would sleep on the floor. You know. Moving on to Ibn Asakir's dream. Yeah. Ibn Asakir, عن ابن عساكر عن يعقوب بن سفيان أنه قال states, so this is Yaqub ibn Sufyan narrates that he said, this is beautiful. He said, I used to write hadith in the night time. I used to write hadith in the night time. And I used to have a lamp with me and I used to write. And he said, in the night time, he said, I couldn't see anything. He said, I started panicking. I couldn't see. I lost my eyesight. I couldn't see. He said, I was in a distressed state. He said, فَجَعَلْتُ أَبْكِي. He said, I began to weep profusely. عَلَى مَا فَاتَنِي مِنْ ذِهَابِ الْبَصْرِ. From me losing my eyesight. He said, I went to sleep and I saw the Prophet ﷺ. وَمَا أَنَا فِيهِ مِنَ الْغُرْبَةِ. And he told the Prophet ﷺ what happened. So the Prophet ﷺ looked at me. He said, what's wrong with you? See, I said, look, I write hadith. I can't see anything. He said, what's the big problem? See, I said, I can't see it. He said, come here. He said, فَوَضَى يَدَهُ عَلَى عَيْنَيَّ. He said, he took his hands and he wiped them on my eyes. He said, فَجَعَلَ يَقْرَأُ شَيْئًا. And he was reading something at the same time from the Quran. He said, I woke up and God had returned my eyesight. It's like Busayri's story, you see. This is a story about the food of Medina. Then we'll conclude and try to make a joke. There's a story about the food of Medina. Here it is. Abu Khayr al-Taynati narrates, he said, I entered Medina, and he says, I was bafaqa, which means he was incredibly poor and hungry, and no food. He said, I stayed 15 days and I hadn't tasted anything in Medina. The real people, you know, 15 days without food. We can't take 15 minutes. We're like grazing animals. 15 days he had no food. He said, مَا ذُقْتُ ذَوْقًا. He said, فَتَقَدَّمْتُ إِلَى الْقَبْرِ. He said, I had no choice. So I went to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. I met a man. Oh, this means not part of the story. I was outside the Rawda, and I walked out, and this man comes up to me with this card. You know, you have these beggars. And he came to me, and he said to me, oh, my car hasn't got no petrol. I remember I had my husband, hasn't got any petrol. And I need money. My children don't have any food. I looked at him. I go, you're in the wrong place to ask me that. I said, why? And I said, you know where you're standing? I was standing in front of the Green Dome. I said, you are in way the wrong place to be asking me that question. I said, go over there and ask the Prophet ﷺ. And this shows you that this man was mal'un. He said to me, I've already asked many times. I said, you're in the wrong game, dude. There's something wrong with you. I just walked off, I just turned my head from him. You know, when you're in front of the Prophet ﷺ, there's nobody else to ask there. You are just you're asking the wrong person in the wrong place. In Birmingham, fair enough. You know, but even if you've got money in your pocket, that's the messenger of God is there. You see, you're just asking the wrong. So he went to the grave and he gave salam to the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah. And to Abu Bakr and Umar. And what did he say? He said, Ya Rasulullah. He said, Ana dayfuka al-layla. He said, I'm your guest, messenger of God. I'm your guest. I'm your guest. Yeah? Meaning, I've got nothing to eat and I'm your guest. I'm your guest. I'm a guest in your city, Ya Rasulullah. So I went to sleep next to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. And there, في النوم, Abu Bakr and Yamini wa Umar and Shimali. Abu Bakr on one side, Umar on the other. Wa Ali ibn Abi Talib bayna yadayhi. Saying that Ali standing right in front of him. Yeah? فَحَرَّكَنِي Ali. Yeah? Saying that Ali got me and he shook me like this. And he said, Qum, to stand up, the Messenger of God's coming. You see, so they're standing there, the Messenger of God is not there. He literally grabbed me like this. He said, get up, the Messenger of God's coming. So he said, I stood up. فَقُمْتُ. And then he said, I saw the Messenger of God in front of me. He looked at me, and in his hand was a loaf of bread. He said, look. He said, he breaks it in half. He said, you have half, and I'll have the other half. He said, when I woke up, he said, I was satiated. I was satiated. People are fed in their dreams and satiated when they wake up. Imagine that. The level of those are all the stories that I documented for this lesson. I'm going to give the khulasa, inshallah. So, I mean, this is back to Busayri's line again. نعم صلاتي في من أهوى فأرقني والهب يعترض النذات بالألم. I want to talk about alam just a little bit here. I firmly believe that we're not ahal for this line, because this line is something else. But my question is this, and I want to be practical for all of us. We've got tonight at least. How many of us tonight then will yearn to see the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam? People yearn to see haram in their dreams. All it takes is wanting to see the Messenger of God for that. Look at the Shaykh who said, Prophet said to him, why don't you visit us like we visit you? Why don't you do that? I think it's high time that at least we dedicated some nights just begging God to give us a vision of the Prophet. Said that Abu Bakr would find him weeping in the nighttime, weeping profusely to see the Messenger of God, Busayri, etc. All of these people weeping, and they would fall asleep and maybe see the Messenger of God. And the meaning of the line, وَالْهُبُ يَعْتَادُ لَذَّاتِ بِالْأَلَمِ, is that even though they saw the Messenger of God, it was short-lived when they woke up, until they, like Abdullah bin Umar last lesson, actually asked God that I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to leave this world, because unless this vision becomes permanent for me, unless it's after bina, ya Uthman, ghadan, you will eat with us tomorrow, Uthman. I don't want to stay here. I want to leave this place. The question is for all of ourselves, and do we really want to? People, we always say, I want to see the Prophet, I haven't seen the Prophet. I'll mention something. First and foremost, the ulama are quite clear about it. If a person sees the Prophet, this is my opinion, maybe kind of tabsira on this. I'll give what the ulama say, my opinion. First, the ulama say whoever sees the Prophet in his dreams is somebody that will not lose iman. Iman will not exit his heart because of the impact of the vision of the Messenger of God on his heart. Whatever he becomes, iman will stay. That's one thing. I am of a different opinion. It's not different, a bit. I personally believe whoever sees the Prophet ﷺ in their dreams won't go to hell at all. And that's a belief that everybody should hold. It should be what you measure things by. You see, it should be what people measure things by. And that would want people to want it more. And this is why I don't understand why we don't. I mean, when you ask people what they want from the world, if you surveyed 1 million Muslims, I don't think one of them would say, I want to see the Prophet ﷺ. And that's just a dark reality of our state. A dark reality of our state. I don't personally think there's anything in this world except to see the Messenger of God. You know, I know great people that have privately stated they have seen the Messenger of God. Yaqdatan. How is that even possible? How can you imagine that? They've seen him when they've been awake. I've asked them, what does it feel like? What does it look like? Some of them said we see light first appear, and then we see the Messenger of God. But it's not like seeing a person. It is something that it's not like a projected thing. You can't explain it. You can't describe it. You know you can't reach, but you have to. But that's how we see. Some of them will say, I don't see, but I can hear the Messenger of God's voice in my ear. I can hear it. You see, I can hear his voice. How many of us can even, and these are people of this era, the amount of pollution that we have in our hearts, I'm the foremost first person, it's very difficult for the vision to penetrate, to be allowed to take place in that regard. And I think we all need to seriously ask ourselves the question, what Sayyidina Khadr said, which is, Allahumma farrighni, oh Allah, free me for that khalaqtani, for what you have created me for. Free me to do that. And I think until we realize that, only then will we understand what Busayri was going through, what Busayri found. I think it makes the world a little less important. I think it makes the world less important. And one of the things I would say, because a lot of these types of durus, and this is for me, to be honest, I can bear for myself. Turn up, at least I can try to benefit from at least reading this stuff. And that's something important that I want to speak about. We don't have a community left. You know, when they say on the news, the Muslim community, I would love to see it. We don't have a community. I mean, this is what people did every day. That was a Muslim community, where people got together on Mondays and broke their fast together. Where people would be walking down the road and they see somebody else walking out of the house and they're all going to Fajr together. Where there was an actual community. A community of people. And that's when people would see the Prophet would stand up in gatherings. They would stand up in gatherings, read the reports of people would literally, whilst they were in a gathering, would stand up and they said, Ja'a Rasulullah. The messenger of God has appeared to them. Or they've seen the messenger of God in a gathering. This is incredible. These are those people of Suhbah. And then people wonder why we're depressed. I've come to the conclusion that everybody's depressed. There's no community and there's no Suhbah. All everybody cares about is offending other people and proving why they're right. Even now, somebody will send you a text message that would be very offensive, but just they sugar it, coat it with a multicon. Is that what it's called? What's that face thing? Faces emoticon. Multicon. Emoticon. So what they'll say is it's like saying you're an idiot, lol. So they're going to offend you, and then they can get. Do you know God forgives you for everything? Everything God forgives you, except hurting people. You won't be forgiven for that. They have to forgive you for that. That's the era that we live in now. Everybody's just hurting other people. That's all we're concerned with, you see. Nafs ala nafs. Nafs ala nafs. And then we wonder why the Messenger of God doesn't come to visit us. It's because of the amount of rights we've taken away from other people. The amount of rights, or the claim of aphorisms and tasawwuf. You can have the biggest tasbih in the world and make you a good person. You see? It's completely lost now. We need to learn not to hurt other people. That was a primary advice of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, خَالِقِ النَّاسَ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ. The hadith is اتَّقِ اللَّهِ حَيْثَمَا كُنْتَ. Be aware of God wherever you are. وَأَتْبِعِ السَّيِّئَةَ الْحَسَنَةَ. And follow a bad deed with a good deed. Cures OTD. OTD is a worry of something bad you've done. Here's your answer. Just do something good, it's gone. Samhuha, the Prophet ﷺ said, it removes it. Why are people worried about sin for? Just do something good, it's gone. That's all it takes. The message of God, this is not for debate. Do something, you've done something bad. People go, I've done something really bad. Then go do something good. They'll wipe it away. وَخَالِقِ النَّاسَ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ. And treat people with the best of character. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر لي ولكم وأتوب إليه. See everybody next month.